when I was visited by Pooja and Vivek earlier this year, and they came to tell me about Bharat dialogue and the idea, which was still an idea then, of the Ghazipur Literary Festival, I immediately told them, look, I will come. Because, there's a time and place for everything. And I firmly believe that Pooja and Vivek were sent to me to bring us back to Ghazipur, to our roots. And I want to thank you for giving us this opportunity. Now, Ghazipur has always been an abstract idea in my mind, my wife's mind, in Listra, because her roots are also in Ghazipur, and that of my family. I came very close to Ghazipur in 2019, in January, when I visited Varanasi. And as I was driving to the venue of the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, I was very privileged to be honored by the government of India with the Pravasi. And I saw the sign Ghazipur on the freeway. And I said to my colleagues that were in the car, that's where my roots are, and one day I want to go there. And I'm finally almost here. Now, when one speaks, Pooja, you said something very profound. And this is human society. And you said many people stated that you were mad to think of having a literary festival in Ghazipur of all places. It's never been done, and it's the first time. But of course, as you pointed out, you had many difficulties, you had many hurdles that yourself and Vivek faced. And I'm glad you did have those difficulties, because nothing in life comes on a straight line. It is only when you have these hurdles and difficulties in life, you really appreciate the value of the end product. So you are sitting here very gratified today, and I must express in absentia our gratitude to Bharat Express and Sri Upendraji for giving you the support he has given you. And I think he deserves a great round of applause. Because always, in your hour of darkness, the divine sends you light. And from what I've seen, he was one of those lights that showed you the path and got you to persevere and not give up your journey. And I know that this first edition of the Literature Festival in Ghazipur will not become the last. It is the beginning of a great journey. Now, coming back to madness, my PhD was on the Ramakrishna mission. And I was very glad to hear Sri Upendraji speak about Vivekananda's journey to Ghazipur. And when people observe Sri Ramakrishna outside the Kali Mandir, sitting there day and night for years, and crying out that another day has passed and I have not seen you, mother. And people started saying, look at this madman. This guy is mad. Look at how he is behaving. Crying because he is not seeing God in the image, in real life. And much later, Sri Ramakrishna was to say, yes, I am mad. I am mad with the love of God. And that's the best kind of madness that one can have. So your madness is a good madness, because you believed in a vision and you are living that vision. When one speaks of roots, in South Africa, one was very challenged about one's identity. I was born into my land of birth, and Africa characterized my entire being. It is my Janma Bhumi. I'm as African as any other African, born and raised in this continent. But like all of us, we have multiple identities when you speak of identity. I'm a son, I'm a father, I'm a husband, and many other things. But they all coexist harmoniously within my being. Now, when you look at the concept of roots, in my specific case, and I believe many others, we have Keshav Tiwari here from Guyana. He has the same kind of history as I have. When you remove a tree from its place of origin, from where the seed was planted and where it sprouted to become a tree, for whatever reason, and in the case of Indenture and Girmitya, we were uprooted. Our ancestors were uprooted from the ground in which we took birth and transported to an environment that was alien to us. Not only transported, but transplanted into that soil. But like Sri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, when the Atma leaves the body, it just leaves the physical body. But what it carries with it, it's all of the impressions, all of the karmic activity of that life that is not extinguished at the time of death. You all know this. So when you uproot a tree, the roots of that tree contains all of the nutrients, all of the DNA, all that is absorbed from that soil. No matter where you take that tree and replant it, you cannot get rid of its very essence, of the soil that nourished it. So as much as the British colonial powers took us out of Bharat and transported us to places like South Africa, Mauritius, Guyana, Suriname, Fiji, Trinidad, they took us out of Bharat. But what they can never do and never could succeed is take Bharat out of us. And therefore, that tree always yearns for its source. Always yearns for its source. And within us, there is this thirst to come and find that place of origin from where you emanated, no matter where you are. No matter where you are. So this is a journey of going back to roots, going back to that source that nourished you, nurtured you, no matter how many generations back. The DNA of my great-grandparents that came from a village somewhere here in Ghazipur still lives in me. It's an innate part of me. It's an innate part of me, like it is with all of us that were uprooted from this part of the world during the colonial period. For all of the wrong reasons. For all of the wrong reasons. Because as you very well know, in 1834, slavery was abolished. And the British had to find another source of cheap labor. And they invented what they called the indenture system. It was nothing but a replacement of slavery. And India, as being the crown of the British Empire, became the source, the main source of that cheap labor. And we were the products of it. Some voluntarily went, but the majority forcibly, under false pretense and false hope and false promises, put on ships and sent to various parts of the world to fatten the empire. And that's my roots. That's the roots of the Girmitya community. And therefore, as I've said, wherever we are, this yearning of wanting to find out. Because if you don't know your roots, you don't know who you really are. And you have to be rooted in your identity. And in South Africa, we had this major challenge of not just colonialism, we had institutionalized racism, of apartheid. And having been born into an apartheid society that immediately categorized you in terms of your race as a second or third class citizen, if you were not white, you were already at a disadvantage, and you were also challenged in terms of your identity. That you are inferior to another race group in terms of everything around you and your place in society, where you lived, which school you went to, where you could go to, where you could not go to, which beach you can swim in. All of these were challenges that you had to live with while trying to understand your place in society. But one of the strengths of the Indian community in South Africa, those that went there as Girmityas, through this isolation, and as you very well know, India was the first country to impose sanctions against the apartheid regime in South Africa, way back in 1946, even before you became an independent sovereign nation. You were the first country to also take this unjust system of apartheid to the United Nations. It was India that took it and raised it for the first time in the United Nations. This struggle for our freedom. And later on, of course, the United Nations was to declare apartheid as a crime against humanity, and South Africa was suspended from the United Nations. A movement started by India. Because you understood suffering, you understood subjugation, you understood discrimination, and you understood also what it is to fight for freedom. And as a student of Indian history, this part of the world fascinated me and inspired me. Because your first war of independence in 1857, the epicenter was in this region. And many that were sent to South Africa were prisoners of that period, who were seen as troublemakers and the British wanted to get rid of. And they transported them to the various parts of the British Empire as cheap labor. But that didn't kill the spirit which nourished and sustained our ancestors. They went there with nothing. They went there penniless. My great-grandparents left India in 1892 aboard a ship called Pongola, the 15th, landed in South Africa in January 1893, the very year that Gandhi was also to land in South Africa in March 1893, and to stay on for 21 years in South Africa. And it was South Africa and the Girmitya community that transformed Gandhi, because Gandhi went there as a very privileged individual. He was a young barrister. He went there to fight a case for a merchant, Indian merchant in South Africa. That was the reason he went to South Africa. He didn't go there as my great-grandparents, as a sugarcane worker. He went there as a professional. And it was his experience in South Africa, and the first major shock that came to him was when he was kicked out of a first-class train. He bought a ticket to sit in the first class, because of course Gandhi was a barrister, an aristocrat in some senses in society. He didn't buy a ticket to sit in third class. And he had a harsh shock. Doesn't matter that you're a barrister, that you're a professional, you're from high society, but you're black. You don't belong in this train. He was kicked out because of the skin of his color. And that's where the transformation of Gandhi started. And that's where Gandhi started associating and understanding the pain and hardship of our Girmitya community, which led to this transformation of Gandhi the lawyer to Gandhi the philosopher and the freedom fighter. It was in South Africa that Gandhi gave birth to his philosophy of Ahimsa and Satyagraha. which he brought back to India and applied to your own freedom struggle. Very often I say, had Gandhi not come to South Africa and transformed in the manner in which he transformed, how would your freedom struggle have shaped itself? Because it was in South Africa that he became a political activist and came back here and played a role in your struggle. So this Girmitya community contributed indirectly to your own freedom struggle through Gandhiji. And today, I think there's a yearning. Why this time and age? You see many South Africans, and I think this is true throughout the Girmitya communities. Because we have risen from almost nothing. As I said, my great-grandfather one day, to work on the sugar plantation, he was assigned, as was the case, when you were offloaded from the ships in the countries that you were dispatched to, you were assigned to a sugar plantation. And he was assigned to a sugar plantation. But within a generation, my grandfather was no longer cutting sugarcane. He became a businessman within one generation. And of course, if you look at the Indian community today, none of them are working cutting sugarcane. By and large, they have picked themselves up. They have contributed to South African society. They are as much South African as any other South African citizen, because that's the land of our birth. We contributed to the freedom struggle. If you look at the proportion of Indians in the totality of South Africa's population, we make up just over 2% of the population. But if you look at the number of Indians that were incarcerated, including with Mandela in Robben Island, the number that lost their lives, the number that was put in prison, it far outweighs the small percentage of the totality of South Africa's population we made. Because already when we left here, we were part of this struggle. We understood what discrimination is. And very often, I'm told, including by Indian diplomats that served in South Africa, that the Indians who came to South Africa were poor and illiterate. And I always ask myself, the period when indenture started, from the 1834 onwards, who amongst India was the rich apart from the Maharajas? By and large, the rich legacy of India, pre-colonialism, the colonial powers took away. They depleted India of its richness, of its dignity, and tried to get rid of its culture. And therefore, as we say, and I say this, we are still a transforming society in South Africa, as you are. We have decolonized in the sense that we are independent sovereign states. But by and large, many of us, our minds have not been decolonized. We are still colonized in many ways in terms of our thinking, that what comes from the West is right, and that our culture is inferior to that of the West. And we must get rid of this brainwashing and decolonization of the mind. I still see it in your society, in the short period of a year that I've been here. It is very much in South African society and many other of us that have been colonized. And the day we realized that long before the period of colonization, Indian culture and civilization for thousands of years nourished humanity. And that you come from a culture and civilization. I come from this culture and civilization that roots me, that has thousands of years of history. And I think that's the strength that has nourished us and has anchored us and has anchored me. Despite, I was earlier this week asked, I was giving a lecture to a group of students in Delhi, and they had a rapid fire round. And one of the questions they asked me, which is the one book that has influenced your life? And I immediately said, it's the Bhagavad Gita. Because it has. When I was struggling to understand this whole unjust system of apartheid as a young student, I read the Bhagavad Gita. And for me, it contextualized what was happening in South Africa. Kurukshetra was South Africa. It was the battlefield. The Pandavas with us fighting for justice. And the Kurus were the white apartheid regime. And that gave me direction in life, how to be part of this struggle for freedom. And that book continues to nourish me even today, because it's such a powerful message that Sri Krishna gave on the battlefield. A message that is universal and a message that nourished us. And one of the books, I would say the major scripture that rooted us as Girmityas, not just in South Africa. I recall that when I was a child, every morning, I didn't see my grandfather, he passed on before I was born. But every morning, on a Friday, I would hear the chanting from the Ramayana. My father would sit in a room and he would read the Ramayana. And I think it was the Ramcharitmanas of Tulsidas that we all carried with us, our forefathers. And that anchored us, gave us hope and gave us courage in the dark days of apartheid in South Africa, in the dark days of the challenges that they faced as slave labor on the sugarcane fields. What gave them strength and hope? It was the message of Sri Ram that ultimately there will be victory. And I stand here today because of the sacrifices they made, the hardship they faced, the pain and suffering that our great-grandparents faced under the system of indenture. But it didn't strip them of their identity. All it did was reinforce their identity because they came from a culture that rooted them. You could not extract the blood of Shiva out of the veins of my great-grandparents, no matter how much you tried. You could not extract the breath of Sri Krishna out of my great-grandparents, nor from myself, because it seeped in me, and that's my being, and that's my being, and that's your being, and that's the being that unites us as Vasudeva Kutumbakam, because that's what we believe in. The world is ultimately one family. It is not just about you and I, it is about all of us. And I'm I think I'm extremely privileged to be part of Sanatana Dharma. As Sri Aurobindo so rightly said, he was such a major influence in my life in understanding the struggle in South Africa, that the rise of India means the rise of Sanatana Dharma. He saw this long ago, and we are seeing that today in India. The dignity, the worth of this country on the global stage. And I want to add another dimension to that. The rise of India is also the rise of the global South. It is also our rise. As India rises, we take pride in that because it lifts us from the global South. It lifts us as African countries because you identify with us, you see our struggle. And it is not only about your rise, it's not a selfish ascendancy. It's an ascendancy where you pull all of us up. And that's why what is happening in India today is not only about India. It gives us hope about countries that are still developing, that we can also rise. And I want to thank Bharat Dialogues, and especially Pooja and Vivek, for giving me this privilege. No one in my family has gone back to that village. After my grandfather visited, I was told the last time in 1935. And my going back to that village, I may not find my ancestors there, but just touching that soil from where my foreparents came, I think will be the fulfillment of a yearning and an emptiness that is inside of me. And that will be filled and a void no more there. But I know that I've come back home, and thank you for bringing me back. Thank you so much.